On the Track is a web TV show about cryptozoology, natural history, green issues and whatever else the team feel like making up as they go along. Enjoy!
Well, Jeff, what's this week's episode all about? I'll tell thee, Barry. I'll tell thee. It's a bit of a special one. It's a 3-hour-long documentary, special feature-length episode. Oh yeah. What's the subject then, Jeff? Well, it's a 3-hour retrospective of the Corns Hotline.
And I think that is the sort of thing that CFZ TV should be concentrating on. In-depth investigations into the ephemera of John Major's premiership. Well done to everybody involved.
I really like the old credits.
So what do we have in this episode, Mr. John?
Well, this is a particularly exciting episode, Hennis. We start off by visiting a man that I've known via email for about 7 years, but never actually spoken to in the flesh until this evening, John Saeki, who has just written, or just published, a fantastic book about the last tigers of Hong Kong. And then we go back to Loch Ness for the second part of Ian Squibbs' description of the life and exploits of Frank Searle. Was he one of the greatest Loch Ness investigators, or was he the greatest Loch Ness fraudster? You're going to have to wait to the end to find out, because he's got a special treat for us. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's John Downs. I'm the director of the Centre for Fortean Zoology. Over there, asleep behind me. Can you see him? Wave to the boys and girls. Say hello, Richard. Wave. Over there, waving languidly, is my old friend Richard Freeman, who is cuddling my little dog Archie. It's Saturday afternoon, it's 3 o'clock, and so welcome to another episode of On the Track. Every Saturday afternoon at about 3 o'clock, I bring you about a half an hour potpourri of hard science, weird shit, and whoop, 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 surreality. And if you don't know what surreality is, cop a load of this.
The sun rises early in the morning, the sunrise as she bring in the dawning, sharing all the lights all around.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, regular viewers will remember that I devoted On the Track Extra to an unboxing, or rather an unpacketing, of this book, The Last Tigers of Hong Kong by John Saeki. And it's a fantastic, fantastic, fantastic book, and unless something else comes along to beat it, it is by far my cryptozoological book of the year. It's an absolutely brilliant book. And, believe it or not, it turns out the reason it was written in the first place is actually partially down to me. So it was a great pleasure to catch up with John on a Zoom call and to finally put a face to a name and meet the chap that I had been corresponding with on and off for quite a few years. Ladies and gentlemen, John Saeki. Thank you for being here today. Yes, it is recording. Thank you for giving me time today. I loved your book. I thought I've been looking forward to it ever since you first wrote to me about it years ago, but I had no idea it was going to be as good as it is, because it's an absolutely remarkable book. And congratulations, you deserve.
Thank you.
You deserve amazing amounts of sales.
Thank you very much.
And you were kind enough to say it was because of me that you sort of started it off.
Yeah, definitely. I remember reading that article. I was very interested in Hong Kong wildlife, and at that time I wasn't particularly looking for the tiger, but I found your porcupine article from the Hong Kong University, and it just got me thinking. It was just it planted a seed in my mind, for sure. And it was just, I think it was that you introduced for me the concept that, you know, the famous tigers weren't the last of an indigenous population. Why would they be? Of course, you know, but it was a new thought to me at the time, and that, of course, they were visitors, and then that really opens up the possibilities. So yes, it's great to be able to thank you for writing that.
Well, I think that because tigers, like most big cats, roam over a sizable range, I don't think there was ever anything such as, I don't think there ever was an indigenous Hong Kong tiger or leopard. I think they were always at the edge of their population, coming in from the mainland.
Absolutely, makes total sense. But most of us don't look too closely at the habits and behaviors of wild big cats, and probably in just a kind of a lazy way, we just accept, oh yes, the last tiger was shot, you know, in 42 or 15, depending on which one you subscribe to, and leave it at that, like it's some kind of ancient population that dwindled down and disappeared. So yeah, it just changes the possibilities when you realize they're visitors.
I'm sure that I remember in the 1942 tiger, I'm sure I remember that there was supposed to be some other mysterious animals seen at the same time, or am I dreaming that?
42, I don't know of another mysterious animal, but I do know that in Herclotz's book that he brought out in 1951, he mentioned that dugongs a dugong had been captured during the wartime or just before. Unfortunately, he didn't have a photograph, and he was very surprised about the dugong because he didn't expect to see any and hadn't really heard about them on the China coast at all. But he found some records that went back to like 1600s that recorded dugongs. So definitely there were more creatures than we all that we knew about, I guess.
That's so-called the alleged dugong photograph, because Herclotz said that he believed it had been photographed before it was cut up and meat sold. That's the holy grail that Richard Muirhead and I have been looking for years. And I don't think anything would make us happier than finding the photograph of the dugong. But in your book, you came up...
It'd be amazing.
Yeah. In your book, you came up with a whole lot of big cat reports I'd never heard of. I mean, I knew about 42, I knew about the 16, and I knew about the ones that were mentioned in the Hong Kong Naturalist, but you come up with a whole string more.
Yeah.
How difficult was it to go through the archives and manage to come up with all that?
Once once I discovered the archives, it was fairly straightforward, but just quite time consuming and in some ways tedious, except of course I'm interested in the subject, so that made up for it. It was because I came across the online Hong Kong library archives, and I just did a search for tiger, and I could divide it up into decades, and then online it comes up as grainy digitalized newsprint, and you have to zoom in onto the page, find the article you're looking for, and then zoom. So I did. I went through. I found about 100 or something articles, and I logged them all onto a spreadsheet and divided them up into the decades. So that, yeah, once I discovered that, it came through. It's time consuming but fairly straightforward. Before that, it was very difficult because there were many experts who were interested in the topic and who found the concept quite easy to understand, but they didn't have any details to add other than, as you mentioned, Herklotz's 1930s reports and the famous ones. I spoke to Chris Coggins, who's a South China tiger expert, and again, he completely accepted that Hong Kong was on the edge of the South China tiger territories, but he didn't know anything about it because he didn't go to Hong Kong to study the tigers. He went to Fujian and Guangdong and Hunan. So I talked to Dr. Gary Aids of Kadori Farm, and it was very pleasant. And again, he explained that it completely fitted with his understanding, but he didn't have any actual details to add to it. So it was in the newspaper reports, and it was a great find once I started opening those up.
I went through quite a lot of those articles a few years ago because I was trying to check out Herklotz's claim about there being the red dogs in Hong Kong. And
Oh yes,
I found
right.
out that, did you come across somebody called Pythagoras using the pen name?
Pythagoras. It does sound familiar, yes. But I'm afraid I don't know I don't know the details on that. But
Because I came across his writings, and from what I can see, he is the source from which Herclox extrapolated that there were red dogs. Whereas it mostly seems to me that the dogs that were reported, the wild dogs both on the island and in the New Territories, all the way from the 30s up to the beginning of the 60s, were actually feral domestics. There were just packs
right,
of stray dogs, which is a great pity because I really wanted
yes,
there to be red dogs, but I don't think there ever were.
right,
The big,
right.
the biggest query about the Hong Kong tiger and the biggest controversy was the 1942 tiger a bona fide wild tiger, or was it from that Turk circus which Graham Wright Newth says was at Repulse Bay at the beginning of the
Right,
invasion?
right. Yeah. I've seen those discussions also on the Gulo website. And I it I think that on the one hand, it's completely possible that it was a circus escapee, but on the other hand, when you see the tiger reports going up to the war in the 1930s, And then, quite surprisingly for me, after the war, the second half of the 40s, the intensity of the tiger reports was quite amazing. I think I counted 14 tiger reports. And by that, I mean tigers that are separated into 14 tiger incidents. And of course, it's hard to tell whether that's a single tiger returning and sometimes people report 2 or 3 tigers, but it's an extrapolation based on how it was reported at the time. So a writer may say the Kowloon tiger was seen again, or there was another report. Anyway, so using that kind of methodology, I put it down to about 14 reliable tiger incidents. So that's very intense post-war. And so, do we need a circus to explain the 1942 tiger? And for me, even though this is not really about conclusive proof, but my sort of judgment on it is that I don't think we actually need a circus tiger. Of course, if someone knows there was definitely a tiger that went missing, then that makes it quite likely. But a wild tiger fitted the series of tiger reports that went on through before and after the war period.
The thing that's always intrigued me about that, and the reason I would like to believe it was a circus tiger, is that according to Hakka folklore, if a tiger arrives in a district where there hasn't been a tiger, it means there's going to be a change of emperor. And I love the idea that this was a very crafty piece of psychological warfare, saying that the King Emperor, George VI, was just about to be replaced by the God Emperor Hirohito. And I just love the idea that it was some poor unfortunate tiger got massacred for what these days we call fake news. But you're right, there's absolutely no reason why there needs to be a circus tiger. I just hope there was, just from that piece of maybe mischievous more than anything. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for from John Saeki this episode. But there's another episode coming up next week, and John will be back to talk about the rest of his book. He is a fascinating interviewee, and I'm very, very much looking forward to sharing the second part with you. But now, over to Loch Ness, where we meet up with Ian Squibbs, who's continuing to tell us about the life, the times, the exploits, and the misdoings of Frank Searle.
So anyway, let's move on. So Frank, he would often be accompanied on his search by what he would refer to as his Girl Fridays. That's what he called them. And these were basically young women seeking adventure who would often stay with Frank in his caravan. And Frank would give them the excitement of the monster hunt, and they would return the excitement in other ways for Frank. And one of the ways he would recruit such young women was to place adverts in parts of the country where unemployment was high, so it made it easier to get such women. So that was one of the things he did there. So I got another picture, a nice portrait of Frank, stood at the doors of his exhibition there with his camera. He's always got his camera in his hand ready for the next shot, looking pensive there. The proud monster hunter. So anyway, as time went on, the more serious monster hunter started to get fed up with Frank and his antics. His photos were clearly faked, and he was doing more harm than good towards finding the truth about Loch Ness. So people had suspicions about Frank's pictures, and I wonder why. If we go to the next picture there, Jonathan, number 15, let's just have a look at that and see. We got a side-by-side comparison of that excellent photo he took of the monster, and then below, for comparison, as you said, actually, there's a picture of a brontosaurus from a children's dinosaur book, and looks a bit suspicious there.
It's
So
identical, isn't it?
it is, yes. So there's Frank. So yeah, Frank had clearly been hard at work with the scissors and the Pritt stick when he made that one. So, and then if we go to the next picture, there's that head and neck shot, pretty impressive photo. But below there's also for comparison, there's another shot of exactly the same place in the loch. And as we can see, it's just a post sticking out of the loch, no doubt to tie a boat onto. Frank had dressed up the post to look like a monster and taken a photo, and there you go. That's how it was done.
Good God.
So the truth was coming out. So there's just two examples of what he had been doing. So, described as a colourful and controversial character, Frank often clashed with other investigations and is now widely recognised as a serial hoaxer. Well, Frank would always deny that his photos were faked and would often get angry and aggressive with people who suggested that they were. He made death threats to other investigators and even pulled a knife out when a reporter suggested that his photos had been faked. His fallouts with other monster hunters became apparent when he wrote his unpublished second book, and he wrote this of Tim Dinsdale. This is what he said. Reading Tim Dinsdale's books and listening to him on the television, one is given the impression that he gave up a lucrative career as an aeronautical engineer to become a Loch Ness investigator. But when Mr. Dinsdale came to Foyers in April 1960, he was unemployed, on the dole. He arrived in a car which many people would have written off as an old banger, and he brought with him a small, very much patched up rubber dinghy. So had it in for Tim, didn't he? And he went on. Frank said of the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau of the 1960s, they were mainly hippie types. Yeah, Jonathan. The Bureau's headquarters had become a shambles. Guys and girls shacked up in caravans, drunken parties, pot smoking, and the vans were more like pigsties than living quarters. Well, sounds all right, actually.
I think what's wrong with that?
Yeah, sounds like a good time. Anyway, so the camera watching became a joke. Being on the main road and the only source of information, Bureau's public relations hut did a roaring trade. The money just poured in. So he wasn't too impressed with the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau either. Anyway, so in the book, Frank basically slags off everyone who has anything to do with the Loch Ness investigation apart from himself, and accuses them of being in it just to make a quick buck. Frank also punched Nicholas Witchell and threatened to kick Dick Rayner's head in. So there we go. Those things were turning sour for Frank at this stage. So got another. Go to the next picture there, number 17, John. We'll just look at a shot at dawn. Frank's encampment, quite atmospheric shot over Loch Ness. So that's a nice photo. And this you can see Frank there again with his camera. Anyway, Frank's search for the monster ended in 1983. He painted the words "Shine Conman" on the walls of Urquhart Castle in huge red letters, in reference to Loch Ness investigator Adrian Shine. He also set off for Shine's base camp on the shore of the loch and threw a petrol bomb at the party who was sleeping. Luckily, no one was injured. Frank disappeared from the loch not long after this and was never seen there again. His caravan was apparently pushed off the end of Foyer's pier and into the depths of the loch, where it remains today. In later years, Frank ended up living in a bedsit in Fleetwood, Lancashire, and passed away on the 26th of March, 2005, aged 84. So there you go. There's an overview of Frank Searle. So I hope you enjoyed it. But with me being such a big fan of Frank's, I made it my mission to retrace the footsteps of the great man. Or should I say, footstep, as he only had one leg. And find the location where his caravan and piss-poor exhibition once stood. So what we'll do, Jonathan, I've got a video clip. Let's play it and see how I got on. So I was here in 1969 at Foyers Bay, where Frank Searle turned up in pursuit of the monster. Staying here until the early 80s, obtaining numerous photos. Let's just have a look. You can see there. If we look at the mountains, you can line up exactly where he would have had his caravan. That tree there. There is a picture of Frank's caravan. Oops. Would have been located around here. Let's have another look. Another view of his caravan there with the hills behind the slope. And he stayed here until the early 80s, obtaining numerous dodgy photos of the monster and getting on the nerves of the more serious investigators. This is the view Frank would have had from his caravan each morning. Frank's activities culminated in a petrol bombing of the Loch Ness investigation team led by Adrian Shine at the time, and apparently this is Foyers Pier, where Frank's caravan was pushed into the loch. Let's have a look. So that there. Yeah, so this is where Frank's investigation would have ended, on this pier here. His caravan would have been pushed down here. Let's just follow the route. And then into the depths of the loch here. So down there somewhere should be Frank's caravan, as well as the monster as well. So then there's no sign of the monster there. But a nice view down the loch. There we have it. Frank Searle's camp on the shores of Loch Ness. Frank is no longer here, and he passed away in 2005, so rest in peace, Frank. Mission accomplished. If you put the next, I got the final picture. Let's put that picture up, Jonathan. Picture number 18. I got a comparison of the Frank Searle site as it was and how it is today. So found out where he was there, and if you line up the mountains, it's definitely where the exhibition stood. Nice. Anyway, further reading, if you're interested in Frank and you've got an hour to kill, there's a good documentary on YouTube called The Man Who Captured Nessie. So that tells you all about Frank's antics, and I can recommend it. So have a look and see. And yeah, so that's just where we are. But let's finish. Let's finish on a final thought, just for us all. Frank was sneered upon in the monster hunting community. Dinsdale, Shine, Rhines, Witchell, that lot, But who would you prefer to go for a pint with? That boring lot or Frank Searle? I know who I would be stood at the bar with, having a right good laugh. Thank you.
And I think me and Doc Shields will be just next to you.
Yes.
That's
so there you are.
I've met a couple of people, they're both dead now, but who were friends of Sid Henley from Opera Books, who died some years ago and was a generous benefactor to the CFZ. He told me, apart from saying that I reminded him of Frank Searle in various but that was mainly because of the ways of girls and beer. But he said that Frank Searle was a really, really nice man, and that he thought he'd been unfairly vilified by various members of the Loch Ness monster hunting
community.
Establishment. And a lady who I haven't spoken to in ages, so I won't name her, but she's a sweetie pie. She knew him as well and said that he was a very nice and kind man. Whereas they thought she thought that he'd been treated fairly badly by Adrian Shine and co.
There was no need for the petrol bomb though, and the vandalism on Urquhart Castle. But yeah, you can see. But you can. On YouTube, there's quite a few. You can see clips of him talking on various programs, and yeah, he does seem like a nice guy, and the sort of guy you would like to meet. But but clearly his photos were faked. So
photos were faked, and there was no excuse for a petrol bomb.
If you want to support us and help us make more content like these, please press like, subscribe, follow our Facebook page and check out our Patreon.
And as the ghost of Joe Strummer, who's an ever more regular visitor to my little studio, wants me to remind you, always press the notification bell. Otherwise you won't be told when there's a new show to watch.
And that would be an awful pity,
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is about that for this week. I'm sorry that we've overrun a little bit, but where on earth could I have cut anything in this week's show? I want to say a big, big, big thank you to John Saeki and to Ian Squibbs for their magnificent contributions. I very much hope that I'm going to have both of them back. In fact, I know I'm going to have both of them back very soon. I want to say a big thank you to Louis, my presenter. I'd like to say a big thank you to Louis, my producer, and to my old friend Richard Freeman, who, together with Jeff at Talking Mongoose, has been doing interesting things. Also starring Captain Peanut Phonobulax, the Magnificent, and Archie, better known as Archibald Archimedes the Archimandrite, who have both been making a fuss of him. So, I'll be back on Wednesday. What's going to happen on Wednesday? Well, I've got a book review that I've just done with Richard Freeman, and I think you're going to enjoy it massively. And next Saturday, what's happening next Saturday? Well, we have the second part of John Saeki's interview. And what else have we got? You're just going to have to wait and find out. So, I'm going to be here. I hope you guys are going to be here, because if so, I'll be seeing you.